today's the 26th of July. Obviously it's a big anniversary for the Cuban Revolution, marking the anniversary of the attack on the Moncada barracks of 1953. A historic, momentous event that was largely seen as sparking the revolutionary wave that resulted in the triumph of the Cuban Revolution in 1959. So we're out on the streets here in Newcastle talking to people about Cuba, talking to people about the struggle for socialism, but we're actually outside Barclays Bank here. Barclays is one of the biggest British high street banks, and it's actually involved it's complicit in the blockade of Cuba. So the US sanctions Cuba. Britain doesn't actually have any sanctions against Cuba. However, the British banks are complicit in the extraterritorial application of the blockade of Cuba. If I try and send a donation to Cuba, it gets blocked, even though Britain doesn't have sanctions against Cuba. If I even try and send a transaction to a Cuba Solidarity group in Italy or in Ireland, for example, and I put Cuba in the reference, it gets blocked. That's because even the word Cuba is blocked. That's how intense, how deeply ingrained the US blockade of Cuba is in the British and European banking system. So we've been involved in a campaign called One Step for Cuba, liaising with different Cuba Solidarity groups in other European countries, talking about how we can expose this extraterritorial application of the blockade, because there are actually laws that are supposed to protect trade between Britain and between the EU and Cuba, despite the US sanctions. So that's what this campaign's about. We're also talking to people about Palestine. We're outside Barclays regularly talking to people about Palestine, and that's because Barclays, alongside many of the other high street banks in Britain, are complicit in the arming of Israel. They're actually profiting from British trade with Israel around the arms trade. So, investments in huge companies like Lockheed Martin, like Raphael, like BAE Systems. This has been bread and butter for banks like Barclays for decades and decades and decades. And so, these high street banks, they have the blood of the occupation of Gaza and the genocide that's unfolding in Gaza on their hands. So we're speaking to people, especially if they're Barclays customers, to say, go in, complain, ask where your money is going, ask how they are investing in the arms trade, because this is not what they're wanting to present. They want to present themselves as an ethical bank. This is not what the reality is. And these customers should also ask, why can't I as a customer go and make a transaction to Cuba? If I choose to make a humanitarian donation to Cuba, why is it getting blocked? These are things that we're asking customers to do. So we're also here talking to people about the 65th anniversary of ICAP, the Institute of Cuban Friendship Amongst the Peoples, and it was founded in 1960, and so this is the 65th anniversary year of the founding of ICAP. Now, we've had a lot of links with ICAP over the years, organising with them to bring over material aid, organising brigades to Cuba, the most recent brigades in 23 and 25 this May. We actually organised to go on a brigade with ICAP for May Day. And ICAP plays a really important role because it recognises that despite the imperialist governments that are in power in Britain, in the US, in the European countries that are complicit with the blockade, that in the case of the US are the architects of the blockade, that are tightening the blockade and really trying to overthrow the Cuban Revolution, there are strong, vibrant solidarity movements with Cuba from the grassroots, from the peoples, because many people around the world see the role that Cuba plays. So, that's why we see images of Che Guevara on the illegal wall, the apartheid wall around the West Bank. That's why we see, the Cuban flag being waved on protests all around the world. That's why we see Palestinian doctors returning to Gaza, trying to look after patients who are fighting for their lives against the bombs that are dropping on them from Israel, giving thanks to Cuba, who trained them for free at the Latin American School of Medicine. So it's this people-to-people solidarity that Cuba is really well known for, and that there are solidarity movements for Cuba in almost every country in the world. And this is all being possible, this is being brought together by ICAP. that is really coordinating this people-to-people solidarity. So long live the 26th of July, long live Cuban socialism, long live solidarity between the peoples, and long live ICAP, solidarity with Cuba, tell the banks, end the blockade.